Hello and welcome back to Chasing Excellence, a show about chasing what truly matters. My name is Patrick Cummings. As always, I'm here with Ben Bergeron. How are you, my friend?
Doing great. Thanks, Patrick.
Thank you, everybody out there, for joining us. We're going to have some fun here. We, on July 30th is the date that we released it. We put out an episode that we called 3 hours a week to get in the best shape of your life. Almost immediately, I think if it was probably immediately after pressing stop on the recording, you were like, okay, we didn't talk about this, this, and this. So we made a note like, okay, let's do a part 2 of this, because we intentionally didn't want to go, a mile wide and a mile deep, because we would have been there for 2 to 3 hours. So we intentionally did our best to keep it relatively surface level in that first conversation. I think we're going a little bit deeper this time around. Before we do, I would love, maybe could you give us, well, one, go back and listen to that first one, because without the first one, this conversation you might not have an anchor for it. But as a reminder, because it's been a few months now, can you give us like the quick 1 minute, 2 minute version of what we learned in that first episode, where we really laid down the framework and the foundation for what you need to do on a weekly basis to get into the best shape of your life?
Yeah. So getting the best shape of your life is to be really fit. And fitness is this wide-ranging capacity of being strong, having endurance, and be able to do high threshold work capacity. And the weekly framework that we laid out in order to get into the best shape of your life is very simple. It is train 5 or 6 days a week. Those should be made up of what we'll call cyclical threshold conditioning. And this is what, I don't know if we used these words last time, but cyclical threshold conditioning at intentional levels of intensity. And this may be where we're going to
that's now what we're going to focus on today.
201 class, right? So you took the first semester and now we're doing the next one. So train 5 or 6 days a week. 2 or 3 of those, 3 days of those a week should be combined with strength lifts of the power lifts, pressing, squatting, and deadlifting. We want to make sure we have full ranges of motion. So if you are limited, work on that. Just work on it enough that you're not limited by any range of motion, and get good at running. That's really what it comes down to.
Dig it. We're going to talk about some of those things, especially some of those phrases you just used. So let's dive right in. Cyclical threshold conditioning is something we mentioned, and I think this is the thing that after we press record, you're like, oh, we didn't actually define what that is, which prompted this episode. Cyclical threshold conditioning. What does that mean, and why is it useful for us to know?
So if we broke down the words, right, cyclical means that you can keep going. It's like a cycle. It just the wheel keeps spinning. It doesn't stop at any point. Threshold means you're at the breaking point. It's about to come off the wheels. You're about to stop. And conditioning, meaning that we're working our bodies. So I'll talk about just like really simple framework, and we'll give some of the science behind this in a second. So what does this look like? It's when you choose a movement, a load, or an intensity, a pace that you could do over and over again without necessarily stopping. So what that really means is, when I say over and over again without stopping, it's for at least 10 seconds and not more than 120 seconds. Now, it sounds really specific, and it is. And the reason for that is there are a number of energetic pathways, ways that your body uses, creates energy. The one that lasts in that time frame is called the glycolytic pathway. It's basically using stored sugars in the muscles and the liver to produce energy and motion. The ones that are short in that are the phosphagen or ATP. It's really high power. It's things that you couldn't do for more than 10 seconds. So if we were to think of that shorter end, we're thinking about loading a movement. Let's say we were going to do front squats. If you're going to choose a weight that's probably above your 80%, you're going to have to stop after 10 seconds. You're going to get 3 reps maybe. Maybe you get a 4th, but you're certainly not getting deep much past 10 seconds-ish, which means that you're usually just burning up ATP. That is a part of the training, but that's not cyclical threshold conditioning. That's strength training. And this is the definition difference between strength and cyclical. What we want to be able to do is do that over and over. So a lighter load. So this is why most of our loads in our conditioning pieces fall closer to that 30 to 60% range. we might be able to get to some heavy, grindy stuff, but it's going to be very, very grindy. And honestly, once you get above 70%, the strongest athlete's going to win anyway. It is a strength test. So what we want to do is pick movements, pick loads, pick paces that you could hold for at least 10 seconds, but that you could not continue to do for more than 120 seconds. And this is where we get into, like, if we're going to do a workout, let's say we're going to do a workout that has front squats, pull-ups, and running. What we would want to do is choose a front squat loading and rep scheme that will allow you to do at least 10 seconds of work without stopping. Now, you could choose to do any of these movements in singles, but you would have the capacity, if you wanted to be able to do this in greater than 10 seconds. This gives us the greatest carryover, not only in overall fitness, but it does give us a little bit of benefit in the strength category. It does give us a little bit of benefit in the endurance category. But what it really gives us is that high threshold capacity, that VO2 max, that really high-end fitness. And if we do this with mixed modal patterns, movements, meaning weightlifting, body weight, and running is the workout I just laid out, now we're really getting this broad spectrum of capacities. We're not saying just do VO2 max intervals in this 10 to 120 second pace. We're saying do this with mixed modal across those three modalities. If we do that, also with intentional levels of intensity, and when we think about that, there is a certain loading and rep scheme associated with certain movements. So what we want to do is have the majority of those in what we would call our sweet spot or our threshold. And people that have been in the CrossFit space will recognize this. They'll go, oh yeah, that's where those numbers come from. So if we were to do thrusters, a light thruster is 75 pounds. A moderate thruster is 95 pounds. A heavy thruster is 135. If we were to do power snatches, a light power snatch for conditioning is 75 pounds. A moderate one is 95 pounds. And a heavy one's 135. Same thing. If we were to do a clean, a jerk, or a front squat, the light is 95. This is guys' numbers. The light is 95. The moderate is 135, and the heavy is 185. If we do deadlifts, the light is 185, the moderate is 225, and the heavy is 275, maybe 315. So there's these associated rep schemes and the associated loads with light, medium, heavy. Then from there, if it's going to be a light, what you do is you prescribe somewhere between 75 and about 100 reps. If it's going to be moderate weight, you're going to program somewhere around 50 reps. If it's going to be heavy, you program somewhere around 30 reps. And now you start to see how these workouts took shape. So if we take a workout like Fran has a moderate weight thruster, 2159, which is 45 reps. The 50, it's the middle. Again, the light is 75. Let's take a workout like Randy, which is 75 power snatches at 75 pounds, light. How many reps? 75. Let's take a workout like Isabel, 135 snatches, but it's only 30 reps because it's heavy. You start to Diane, 225 deadlifts, 2159, 45 because it's the moderate. And we start to see is like the majority of these girls, heroes, and all the rest fall in the moderate range. Now, here's the interesting part is it's not just for loading, it's also for body weight movements. And there are certain prescribed rep schemes that fall in the sweet spot. This is why you don't see workouts with 2159 sit-ups. It's not enough. It doesn't get you to your threshold. Sit-ups, that number is 150. So 3 rounds of 50 or 50, 40, 30, 20, 10. Annie, right? Or 5 rounds of 30. Like that's how you get to the threshold of the cyclical. Really hard to keep going, but you can keep going. Similar is like with pull-ups. Pull-ups for most workouts, we're going to have pull-ups are a moderate movement. We're going to have somewhere around 50. Fran, that's on the faster side, but we could go as high as up to 100 reps there. When you get to the 150, now you're tipping over. That's EVA, and that's really high. Murph is on the higher side, right? But it's not crazy for the pull-up number. And you start to see like, oh, there are these associated numbers for these different ones. And for most body weight movements, for the moderate ones, it's going to be somewhere between 50 and 100. The lighter ones like ab mat sit-ups will be closer to the 150. The really big, beefier ones like 30-inch box jumps will be closer to the 30 or the 50. And now you start to see how like, oh, intentional levels of intensity. And then what you do is you pair those movements with elegance, complementary movement patterns that allow you to keep the intensity high. Meaning if I do a workout that has bench press, push-ups, and dips, the intensity of that workout is going to go down very, very quickly. Again, intensity is power. Same thing. They're synonymous. How much power can you produce is the intensity of the action. Power is your force, the weight, times the distance, times the reps, times how long it took you to get there, how long it took you to complete it. If I'm going to do a workout that has 20 bench press, 20 dips, and 20 push-ups, man, that's going to take me a long time to finish. But if I paired that bench press with pull-ups and running, wow, now I could keep that because, yes, my heart rate's going to stay high. I'm staying in that threshold range, but because I have these complementary movement patterns with intentional levels of intensity, it's going to get us a whole lot fitter. Then what we do is we take that and we pair it across not only intra-workout, but intra-days. From one day, we're going to pair a lower body push and upper body pull like Fran. The next day, we're going to pair a lower body pull and an upper body push like deadlift and push-up. And now all of a sudden, we can keep this really high. This is where we talked about this a little bit in the last podcast, but you can train VO2 max more than once a week, which a lot of people are doing because you can change up the modalities. You're not using the same muscles. You can work at this high level of capacity because you're doing it at such elegance and such complementary movement patterns with such intentional levels of intensity. The last place that is, are you the time variance and how long we're going, how much volume we're doing. Intensity is not just how fast you're going, how much weight you're lifting, but it's the overall workload as well has to be accounted for. And then you vary the days that way as well. And then you vary also week to week to make sure you're getting there. And all of a sudden we have this better kind of definition of what cyclical threshold conditioning is done at intentional levels of intensity, making sure that you also have a day for a back off, a day for a moderate, and probably only one day where you're truly throwing down with a lot of intensity. Mm-hmm. That's kind of the appropriate way to get into the best shape of your life for the long haul as well.
All right, before we continue this conversation, let's take just a few minutes to say thanks to a few sponsors that help us make the show possible. We're brought to you this week by LMNT. You know hydration is important. That's why we're excited to introduce you to LMNT Sparkling, a bold zero sugar electrolyte drink, now available in a convenient 16-ounce can. Get yourself some by heading to drinkelement.com/excellence. Each can of LMNT Sparkling is loaded with electrolytes and absolutely no sugar or caffeine. It's perfect for health seekers looking for an all-new way to support their health across a broad spectrum of occasions and come in a myriad of tasty flavors. That's right, I said myriad. Citrus salt, watermelon salt, and grapefruit salt, as well as the debut of black cherry lime. Grapefruit salt is Ben's favorite, in case you're curious. If you're an LMNT Insider, you get first access to LMNT Sparkling. If you're not an Insider yet, it's easy to become one. Just purchase an LMNT Insider bundle, and you'll get access to purchase Sparkling for yourself. They're not sure when LMNT Sparkling will launch to the broader public, so if you want to be the coolest kid in gym class, becoming an Insider is the only way to do it. Just head to drinkelement.com/excellence to learn more. And even if you don't grab yourself an Insider bundle, you'll still get a free sample pack with any drink mix purchase. So from our fridge to yours, welcome to the next chapter in the Salty Rebellion. We're also brought to you this time around by Magic Spoon. If you're like me and love a good bowl of cereal, it was probably 80% of my diet in college, but you hate all of the sugar, then you need to check out Magic Spoon. Magic Spoon is a deliciously nostalgic cereal that tastes just like your childhood favorites, but with 0 grams of sugar and a ton of protein. Get $5 off your next order at magicspoon.com/excellence or look for Magic Spoon in your nearest grocery store. Magic Spoon offers a variety of flavors, with fruity and cocoa being the most popular, and many more to choose from. Each serving has 13 grams of protein and only 4 grams of net carbs. It's a wonderful way to start your day. That rhymes, I apologize. Or enjoy as a snack anytime. But wait, there's more. Magic Spoon has just launched their brand new treats. These high-protein treats are light, crispy, and incredibly tasty. With 11 grams of protein and flavors like marshmallow and chocolatey peanut butter, they make the perfect on-the-go snack or pre-post-workout treat. I've been loving these treats, especially after a good workout or even as a little snack after I get the boys to bed. And why is it after? Because if I take them out before they go to bed, they eat them all. The crispy texture and delicious flavors are unbeatable. So if you want to try Magic Spoon for yourself, head over to magicspoon.com/excellence and get $5 off your next order. Or you can find Magic Spoon treats in your nearest grocery store. Remember, that's magicspoon.com/excellence. Save yourself $5 and enjoy some cereal. All right, let's dive back into the conversation. How do people get this wrong? What have you seen, either from a coach who's writing programming or an athlete who's just like, I'm ready to throw down? Where in everything we talked about in that first episode, that framework, but mostly what we just talked about here was cyclical, threshold conditioning, intentional intensity, elegance. Where does the train go off the tracks most often in your experience?
Well, it goes off the tracks most often in the minutia, but the greatest differentiation is in the details, right? Mm-hmm. That's what makes the difference. And it's nailing the associated movement, loading, and rep schemes. If you do a workout with 100 thrusters at 135 pounds, I know that's super hard. That's not the point. We're not trying to make a workout harder. You're trying to put it in the right cyclical threshold. The other place that they go wrong with it is they just it's the same thing, is they just try to make workouts harder and harder. And they can get games athletes do this all the time, where they make it so hard or heavy that they're actually losing a lot of the threshold conditioning. They try to beef it up. I'm going to do these as bar muscle-ups, but now they have to rest 30 seconds between sets. That's not cyclical threshold conditioning. That's start, stop, start, stop. That's interval training. Again, what we're trying to do is get about 5 days a week of this cyclical threshold conditioning. Mm-hmm. That's really what we're looking for. Now, if you are truly a games athlete and you have the capacity to rip off 35 bar muscle-ups, yeah, you could do a 2159 with some heavy thrusters and some bar muscle-ups and have it be that. That is not the case for, forget about the 80-20. That's not the case for the 99% of us. Mm-hmm. You, me, and almost every one of our members would get so much fitter if we did regular burpees, we did regular pull-ups, we did thrusters at 95 pounds, and we weren't trying to do handstand walking and doing 2 ugly ring muscle-ups and resting for 4 minutes between sets just to kind of get up there. Cool and sexy. Yeah, you can Instagram it, and yes, you can gain a new skill. But again, the skill portion of this is not part of the protocol. Do you have endurance? Do you have strength? Do you have high levels of capacity? Best shape of your life. Your body doesn't know if you can do a muscle-up or not. Your body does know if your VO2 max is 35 or 55.
How often is it the case, because we're talking about threshold, we're talking about intentional intensity, we're talking about sort of the finding the sweet spot. How often is it the case that ego is the thing in the way? Because I want to do it at 135 because that's what's on the whiteboard, but I can't do that in a cyclical manner. I have to do it I have to do one, I've got to take 3 big breaths. I suddenly am doing a different workout than was prescribed. If more athletes understood, which is kind of what I'm getting at, if more athletes understood that what the goal here is the cyclical threshold conditioning, not doing what's on the whiteboard just because it's on the whiteboard, or not just doing 135 pounds because, I want to be able to say I did that at 135 pounds or 225 or whatever it might be. Is understanding what we're actually aiming for, that cyclicality, helpful to get people away from the bad decisions that they make before the workout?
Yeah, it's important to understand it. I think it's more the coach's responsibility than the athletes. Are you programming something that your athletes are going to be able to continue to do this movement for greater than 10 seconds? And again, that is on that's on the precipice of not being nearly as effective as it could be otherwise. Mm-hmm. You have the 10 seconds all the way the range to 120 seconds before you start to bump out of that. And maybe here's another part is people go, wait a minute. We do workouts all the time that are longer than 120 seconds. That doesn't make sense at all. Well, every time you break, that resets. So that's what, like, we are already doing little mini intervals all the time. So when you do a workout like Fran, that's so effective. Now, I know that there are people that can do Fran in 2 minutes, but for the normal human being, that takes 6 minutes to do Fran. The way that they normally do it is they'll do 21 thrusters, which takes about a minute, right? And they could not keep doing thrusters for another minute. No one that did those 21 thrusters in a minute could hold on and do that to 42. That's an impossibility. That's why that's such a great movement. It's such a great threshold spot. It's at a minute that we fail. That's awesome. That's really a sweet spot. Because then what do we do after we do those 21 thrusters? We drop the bar. And Patrick, this is a question for you. You've just done your 21 thrusters. What's the next thing that you do?
Well, you take a couple deep breaths.
You're exactly right.
Yep.
You rest.
Yep.
You're resting. You're stopped. Yep. Exactly right. So there you go. Now it's reset. And then you jump up and you do your pull-ups. And for most humans, they'll get, about halfway through that. Maybe they get 10, 12, 15 pull-ups. So they've done another 20, 25, 30 seconds of this movement. And now we're squarely in that glycolytic pathway. This is awesome. We just did a minute of work. This is, you make up the intervals as you go, which is you just did a minute of thrusters and then you rested for 15 seconds. You jumped up, did 35 seconds of pull-ups, came down, rested for another 20 seconds before you jumped up and did another 15 seconds to finish out the set. Then you walked over to the bar. You have 15 to go. That's daunting after what you just did. So you rest for 25 seconds, pick up the bar, and you get 8 reps, which takes you 35 seconds. You drop, and now you get where I'm going. What we're doing is when we're doing Fran, we're not doing a 6-minute workout. We're doing a whole bunch of chunks in that cyclical threshold, in that glycolytic pathway, greater than 10 seconds, but less than 120. And that's our sweet spot. If we can live there 5 days a week, man, we're going to get some crazy amounts of fitness. Mm-hmm. So here's to answer your question, go back to it, to answer your question. It's not the athletes. It's the coaches writing the program. The coaches writing the program are not setting their athletes up for success. And when their athlete comes in and they don't have that capacity to be able to do, so if your 1 rep thruster was 100 pounds, right? And you could do 2 unbroken pull-ups. Can you do Fran?
Technically, yes.
Yes, you can. Why? Now, technically, yes is the right answer. Because should you do Fran prescribed?
No.
No. Why not? Now you have the answer for that.
Yep.
Because what's going to happen is you're going to do your 1 rep thrusters, 100 pounds. You're going to do a thruster at 95. And what are you going to do? You're then going to drop the bar. You haven't yet worked for the 10 seconds. You need to be able to get at least 3 or 4 reps unbroken. That's how we get to, if you can't do that, and again, that would be crazy. That'd be heavy Fran, crazy heavy Fran. That'd be like Fran being prescribed for us at 155, where my thruster is probably like 185. Yours is probably about the same. Could we do Fran at 155? We could, but it wouldn't even be a conditioning thing. It'd be a strength thing. We're building up strength, endurance, not capacity at that point. Capacity the way we're defining it.
Mm-hmm. Can you maybe pull apart a little bit more? We talked about intentional intensity. And one of the things that everybody knows about CrossFit, or at least I think they know, it's that this, constantly varied at high intensity. What is the difference between intentional intensity, high intensity, and absurd intensity?
Yeah. Okay, so first, Greg Glassman, when he coined it very well. Mm-hmm. Very, very well. Concept of varied functional movements performed at high intensity. What everyone did was then they destroyed that and took out the word high and inserted maximal.
Right.
And this program is not supposed to be done at maximal intensity 5 days a week. Greg Glassman himself said that is unsustainable. You are not supposed to do that. It was a thing that went on the internet for a while ago. It was like doing CrossFit at maximal intensity 5 or 6 days a week is a recipe for disaster. Whose quote is that? It was like, post the comments. Mm-hmm. And the people with all these like CrossFit haters and stuff like that, it's like, actually it was Greg Glassman. Because it's not supposed to be at maximal intensity. It's supposed to be at high intensity. Now, what is high intensity? High intensity could be anything from, anything essentially from lactic threshold above. Meaning as long as it's above that kind of like zone 2, we're at a relatively high intensity. That's a high intensity. You're going to get, it's unsustainable essentially is another way. You could not continue to do that for an hour's effort. That's because it's high intensity. So that's the first part of this, is recognizing that it doesn't need to be maximal intensity. It's high intensity. I'm trying to elevate the conversation a little bit and go, it's not even high intensity, it's intentional levels of intensity. There is appropriate days that you should just kind of like back off, get some movement in, do your thing. But even more so, I want the coaches to prescribe, be very intentional with the way that they're laying out the workout to drive a certain adaptation through intentional levels of intensity. Not just, here's the workout, 2159 thrusters and pull-ups. You can thruster 135 as your max. Should you be doing 95? You could, but that's not doing it intentionally, because it's too heavy. You won't be able to get that for, another way to say it is, if you can't do it for 5 reps unbroken, you're strength training. If you can't do it for 5 reps unbroken, you're doing strength training. You're not doing cyclical threshold conditioning. So in that case, like same thing with like muscle ups. If you can't get it for 5, you're not doing cyclical threshold conditioning. You're just resting. And you're resting probably like at least a 1-to-1, if not a 2-to-1, if not a 3-to-1. If you're resting greater than a 1-to-1, you're a power training athlete. You're not a conditioning endurance training athlete. So what's the biggest thing that they're missing? As good as we are as in conditioning our space, we're missing out a lot of the top level conditioning because we don't put enough effort into doing it intentionally.
How do you, as somebody who obviously is in charge of quite a bit of programming, how do you look at a week, or maybe if it's in more than a week, like what are you looking at when you see a week of programming in front of you as you weigh and measure, okay, we need to bump this up, or that's too much, or we did this on Tuesday, so we can't do that again on Thursday. What do you see when you look at a week of affiliate programming or just a week of CrossFit programming, say? What do you start to pick apart, and how do you start to determine good, better, this could be better, this is bad, etc.?
It's actually very formulaic. It's a lot easier than it might seem once you know the formula. And the formula is, you start off with macro movement patterns. So meaning like, are we going to be doing upper body pulling or upper body pushing, lower body pulling, lower body pushing, or ankle dominant movements, basically double under, box jump, running. From there, you want to pair those intentionally to create elegant, complementary, non-interfering movement patterns. And that should make up the 80% of the programming. And you have that not only from one day. So again, if we're going to do Fran on one day, lower body push mediated by the hip into an upper body push, followed by, that's the thruster, followed by an upper body pull with the pull-up. Cool. Those are very complementary movements. That's going to allow us a very high level of intentional intensity. Then from there, we would dissect that workout farther. But as you said, I'll come back to that actual workout. Then you go to the next day. You go, does the next day complement the first day? And if it has, again, lower body pushing and upper body pulling, then the answer is no. But that still doesn't make it wrong. You'd have to know what the third day is, because if you went something like that's close, right? Maybe you did like a walking lunge and a kettlebell swing, right? Okay, but then that means that next day should be really far removed from that. So what we want to do is not only look at the complementary that allows the higher levels of intensity intra-workout, but from day to day as well. So that's the macro movement patterns. Once you lay out the macros, then you go to the micros. And do the micro movement patterns make sense? So if we're going to do lower body push, okay, are we going to do a wall ball? We can do an air squat. We can do a front squat. We can do a thruster. We can do a walking lunge. Like we can choose which of those lower body pushes we choose. And we want to make sure that those are varied across the week. Meaning it doesn't make sense to do just a whole bunch of front squats every time we do the lower body push. Mm-hmm. We don't want some wall balls. We want some air squats. We want some lunges. We want some front squats, and so on. Then from there, we go to what we talked about before is like, are we hitting the sweet spot? So if we're going to be doing wall balls, are we doing wall balls in sets of 10? Like, whoa, that's like 5 sets of 10 doesn't make sense. That's only 50 reps. Wall ball is a light movement. We should be in the 100 to 150 range, or the opposite. Are we doing 5 sets of 50s, right? Mm-hmm. That's 250. That's over-programmed. Like that doesn't make sense. We want wall balls to be around that 150 number. It's like it's a light movement, like a sit-up. We want to be around the 150 number. Same thing. Air squats, we want to be around the 200 to 300 number. Push-ups, we run around that 150 to 200 number. Pull-ups, we run more around the 50 to 100 number. And you guys like, are we in that area? And then from there you go like, well, how long are these workouts? Are they all 10 minutes or some 10, some 20, and some 30? And then we have that, and you pair that then with, are we getting appropriate levels of strength? And we're getting something long enough in there to work on endurance a little bit.
All right. As I sort of expected when we started this conversation, and I'm going to do this now before we hit stop recording. I think there's more to this conversation. And I want to save the more for another episode because I want to continue to go deeper on these things instead of just kind of racing through them. And so we're going to wrap it up there. We've got a lot more. We've got a lot more on our list of things we want to get to as it relates to getting into the best shape of your life, understanding what this sort of foundational fitness looks like, this framework that you've laid out, some of the things we talked about today. So we're going to put on the calendar probably for another couple of weeks from now, part 3. We'll call it a part 3 of this conversation. So stay tuned for that. Wherever you happen to be listening, make sure you subscribe so that you do not miss that when it comes. ChasingExcellence.email, get on our free newsletter list. We will also send out a note when that episode drops as well, so you won't miss it. Thank you so very much, Ben. Thank you very much. This has been super fun to continue this conversation with you, to get to nerd out on programming a bit. So thank you to you. Thank you everybody out there for listening. Thank you for your ratings, your reviews. Thanks for sharing the show with your friends and your coaches, especially your coaches. We appreciate it when we see it. And Ben and I will be back very soon for a brand new episode of Chasing Excellence.